Good afternoon. Welcome to How to Code Music with Algorave. This session is part of the Amsterdam Dance Event online conference. I'm Shelly Knotts and I'm an Algoraver and I'm going to be running this session. And I just quickly want to say thanks to Jesla for inviting me to do this session and also to you all for showing up and taking your first steps into Algorave. I've never done a session like this before, I have to admit. This is all new to me, so please bear with me if anything goes wrong. I have about 20 windows open on my laptop and there's some potential for ending up with the wrong ones in the front. But I'm confident that this is going to be fun anyway, and Algorave is all about embracing error, so let's just go for it. If you have YouTube open, if you want to post any of your burning questions in the chat window, then please go ahead and do so. I'm going to kind of keep half an eye on it, and if there's something that I can answer immediately, I'll try to do that. If not, I'll try to reply to you afterwards, or email me. I'll give you my email address in a bit. So let's get started. As I said, this session is called How to Code Music with Algorave. So Algorave is all about making dance music with code. So how I'm going to run this session, the first part of the session, I'm going to talk a little bit about Algorave, so you know what we're doing and why. And then I'm going to show you some Algorave code in SuperCollider. So my idea here is I'm just going to try and sort of talk through the kind of code that I write in SuperCollider. There's a lot of different ways to do Algorave, so I just thought I would show you something of my practice. And then at the end of the session, I'm going to do Algorave performance. So while I'm talking, I thought it would be a good idea if you want to follow along with the coding part of the session later, if you just now start downloading both SuperCollider and the code file that we'll be using. You just need to go to those links here. So it's supercollider.github.io/download. And if you open that, you should get this window. And you just want to choose the version of SuperCollider for whichever operating system you're using. So I'm using a Mac, so I would click on this one. But if you're using either Linux or Windows, you would want to use the links for that instead. I think the Linux setup is somewhat complicated, but the Mac and Windows ones should be fairly straightforward. So if you're using a Mac and you click on this, you'll get a file that'll download, and that's going to go to your downloads folder here, and you'll just get this SuperCollider folder, and you can just drag that into applications, and we'll come back to that later. I'm just getting some messages on WhatsApp, so I'm just going to check they're not from ADE. No, that's all good. Apparently there's an echo. There we go. Hopefully there should not be an echo anymore. Great. So what was I saying? Yes, and I have to apologize that this session is going to be somewhat Mac focused, just because that's what I'm using, so it's quite hard for me to also talk about what the Linux and Windows versions would be, but hopefully you can work that out as we go. Yes, and then the second link that you need is the code link, so that's tinyurl.com/ade-rave, that should get you to this window. Sorry, it won't get you to that window. It'll get you to a window that looks a bit like this, and if you just click on the file there. And instead of seeing open here, you should see download. So if you just download that, and again, that'll go to your downloads folder on Mac. And you just drag that to wherever you'll be able to find it again on your machine. Okay, so hopefully you can all manage to do that while I'm talking a little bit about Algorave. So I just thought I would tell you a little bit about myself first. So I'm an artist and researcher, primarily a musician, but I also make some live visuals every now and again. And I also have a day job where I work at Durham University on some music research project. I've been algoraving since about 2012, and I never really set out to be an algoraver, just many various curious paths sort of brought me here. So I've been live coding since about 2012, more in experimental music at first, and then I sort of got asked to play Algoraves and I said yes, and now that's what I'm doing a lot of the time. And before that, I worked on other types of music projects involving coding, primarily SuperContinent since about 2005. And when I'm live coding, I would say SuperContinent is my main language, but I'm also pretty happy in Hydra, Tidal, Sonic Pi, and Ixielang. I do perform alone, but I also like to perform with other people. And in my other work, I'm sort of working on collaborative performance software. I work across some genres, so my sort of spiritual home, I suppose, is in experimental and noise music, but I've also played with jazz musicians. And because of Algorave, I've kind of got into playing beats, and I really enjoy that side as well. And my other work is sort of looking at sonification, so using data to make music with, AI a little bit, and sort of some hybrid live coding systems, so combining live coding with other things. So my day job right now, I work on Mimic, which is a project about music and artificial intelligence and a little bit of live coding. And I'm also part of a project called SuperContinent, which is a live coding ensemble that meets online, and we're sort of live coders in all the corners of the globe who use this platform called Estuary to live code together. That's been really fun during the lockdown to sort of keep up with that whilst we can't go out into the world and Algorave. So that's enough about me. So what's an Algorave? So Algorave are essentially dance music parties. They involve live music, live visuals most of the time, improvisation. Most of the performers will be improvising to at least some degree, and to very large degrees for many of them. We all perform with algorithms, so computer music code or other sort of systems for generating music. And sorry, I'm just getting some freezing up on my computer now, and I'm not sure why. I'm just going to keep talking and hope for the best. If there's something going wrong with the live stream, maybe just restart it. Okay. So okay, apologies. I just had a bit of a technical hitch there with some of my hardware. but hopefully I should be back with you now. So I think I got as far as what is Algorave. So essentially, Algorave are dance music parties where people are getting together and making live music, live visuals. Most of the performers are improvising, and we're using algorithms to do that. So exploring code and other sort of rule-based systems. But most of all, it's a community of people who like to get together and listen to music, dance to music, and appreciate algorithms and code for doing so. What Algorave isn't, as with all sort of fledgling niche music scenes, the press like to describe us in various ways, and a lot of times people have written that we're the future of music, but I guess we like to say that actually we're the present of music because we're doing it right now, right here. We're not gonna do it sometime in the future, and we also don't really think of ourselves as the future of dance music. We're doing our thing, but we, as some corners of the press have suggested, we don't actually want to kill DJs. We're just doing our thing, which is different to DJing, and we're totally cool with DJing carrying on for as long as it needs to. So we're not really the future of anything. We're just doing programming in clubs, and it's fun. We're also not really serious programming. There's nothing like particularly serious about Algorave. It's just people having fun with code. It kind of started as a joke and then sort of carried on for a long time because it was really fun. I'm certainly not writing my most complicated and serious code while I'm on stage algoraving. It's more just like hack something and bodge something together and make it work, rather than writing some complex algorithmic construct. It's also definitely not about white men programming. So if you see an Algorave with an all-male lineup, it probably shouldn't really be called an Algorave. We're really keen on sort of maintaining diversity in the Algorave scene. So Algorave is really about sort of performing with code. So we're writing code whilst on stage. We're showing you our code. We're sort of maybe experimenting with some code, hearing how it sounds, and sort of performing alongside this sort of changing code base that we're writing. To give you a sort of idea of how this all came about, live coding, which is sort of the central practice of Algorave, has been going on since about 2000, when Alex McLean and Julian Rohrhuber both started making systems for live coding with. In 2004, the not-so-temporary TopLap was born. So TopLap is the temporary organization for the promotion of live algorithmic programming, which sort of formed in a smoky bar in Hamburg in 2004 with a few people who were sort of interested in live coding. And I mean, it still is here online. There's a TopLap manifesto, which is sort of a temporary and potentially changing document. And now there's also the toplap.org, which is sort of the home on the web of live coding, and there's lots of information there about what live coders are up to. In 2012, there was the first Algorave. It was in London in a sort of primarily noise venue. It sort of started as a joke between Alex McLean and Nick Collins, it all got taken a bit too seriously, and it's still going today, which is great. 2015, we started the Conference of Live Coding, so that's when people from around the world get together and talk about live coding and do performances and share that. And since 2000, there's been a lot of different languages that have been developed by different people for doing different styles of live coding. In the beginning, there was some sort of like parallel European and Mexican scenes, but then it sort of branched out from there. So there's a huge South American live coding scene now, as well as sort of scenes around Europe and in North America and around Asia as well. This is toplap.org if you're interested in finding out more after this about live coding. That's a good place to start. So people have sort of written various like articles there about what they're doing with live coding. You can also get to the discussion forum from there, where you can sort of and the chat system as well, where you can talk to people about all your live coding woes and triumphs, yeah, to also join the mailing list. You can also check out the nodes. So there's like various cities that have like live coding meetups. So if that's your thing, that's a good thing to check out too. And if you live in the city and a city that doesn't have a node yet, and you want to get together with some friends and start a new node, let us know and we can add you to that list as well. So yeah, everything you want to know about live coding you can probably find out there. Yeah, so where are we algoraving? Lots of different places, clubs, experimental underground venues, big festivals. We did an Algorave on a boat once, that was fun. And it's really like an international community now of artists, musicians, and programmers. Our lineups usually include people who've been doing it for a while, with also people who've just started or are maybe doing their first gig. And we really like to encourage people to play their first show early. So, you know, if you can string a few lines of code together and you want to play an Algorave, let us know. And it's a really good way to essentially practice and learn the craft of algoraving, is just doing it in front of people. And yeah, and we're also a diverse community, and we want to keep it diverse. So as I said, we don't do all male lineups because we're, I guess, interested in forming a different type of community to that. So yeah, we're pretty global. UK, that's a big scene. Mexico's got a big scene. Tokyo, various countries in South America, in various points around the United States and Canada, Germany. Oh, this is from an old slide. There's a really nice live coding collective in Nuremberg now, which is the last time I gave this presentation. So if you're in Nuremberg, check them out. And also Spain and the Netherlands have really big communities as well. The Barcelona live coding collective is awesome. And also the Netherlands have an online group of live coders. So if you're in the Netherlands, you should find them through toplap.org. If you're interested in organizing Algoraves, we do have some guidelines for that, so you can check those out online as well. It's fairly low. I mean, we want people to organize Algoraves, so there's not many criteria for what an Algorave should be, and we're interested in people sort of taking it and doing their own thing with it as well. But I guess the most important things are sort of stuff like the code of conduct, which sort of says how people should be behaving in a way, and thinking about sort of diversity and how to encourage that in audiences as well as in lineups. Why are we live coding? Well, I guess mostly because it's pretty fun to live code, and we're interested in sort of exploring this interaction between code and people in both the performance side and in the dancing side, and this idea of unpredictability, and yeah, sort of I guess, and it's also just a really nice community too. So how are we live coding? There's a lot of software now. So Tidal Cycle, SuperCollider, Sonic Pi, Xelang, Foxtrot are probably some of the bigger sound-based programming tools. If you're interested in visuals, Hydra and Live Code Lab are pretty cool. They both have like web interfaces where you can just go there and try out bits of code and stuff, and you can also download it and do some more learning stuff. And then audiovisual stuff, Gibber, that also lives on the web. Overtone is maybe a bit of a older one. PD, there's quite a few. Antonio Roberts is probably the big PD person. And there's also this link you can find on the TopLab website called Awesome Live Coding, which has like this massive list of all the softwares that you can use for live coding, and they all maybe have like some different ways of live coding or different features. So if you absolutely hate SuperCollider at the end of this session, which some people do, then maybe check out something else. Maybe there's something that fits with what you want to do a bit better. So Tidal, for example, is pretty quick and snappy and doesn't involve much typing, and you can get some really complex like pattern stuff going with Tidal, whereas SuperCollider is more about like synthesis and making cool sounds. And then there's like stuff like Ixylang, which is like super easy to learn. So that's also a good one to look at if you're getting started and just want to try out something easy. And then stuff like Gibber and Hydra, if you don't want to do install of software, maybe they're also good things to look at to just try some stuff out. I guess one of the like fundamental aspects of live coding is that we like to project our screen. So live coding is really about transparency and process. So we want you to see our code and understand the process of or understand that there is a process. We don't expect you to understand the code, but more like see how we're typing and where we're typing, and like see everything that goes wrong, which it always does. And yeah, I guess it's also about sort of like thinking about ownership of we're all about transparency. Like, we don't own this code. You can have it if you want. Like, this is a sound I sometimes make when I live code. I'm not sure if you can hear that or not, but it should be some sort of weird noisy sound. And this is something that's a bit more beat-based, rhythmic stuff. And, you know, it's out there and it's on the screen, and if you want to take all of my code during a set and type it yourself, I'm totally cool with that. We're like totally about showing that process and sharing what we're doing with other people. And I guess another aspect that's really important in live coding is error. So because we're projecting our screen and you're seeing our process, like you also see when we crash or when problems go wrong. And yeah, this is like, I had like a pretty horrific crash in a gig once. In lots of gigs, but this was one of the worst ones. And one of the organizers was just like, oh, it's cool, crashing is just what happens in live coding. And I guess there's that kind of acceptance that, like, you know, technology isn't perfect and humans aren't perfect either. And if you're writing code live on stage, there's so many things that can go wrong with that, and that's totally cool. This is like, I guess one of my biggest live coding fails was last year. I did a gig at the British Library and there was like 500 people there or something, and like everything that could go wrong in that set did go wrong, including like my sound cutting out and my collaborators computer crashing, like me not sending, she was like somewhere else sending audio via the internet, and our like network cut out, and then I got some like big audio glitches and everything kind of went wrong. But like it was like, I suppose, kind of theatrical and cool, and like nobody really minds with live coding if you have errors, because like, you know, it's hard enough just to get some code running, never mind expecting everything to go right all the time. So yeah, we're interested in audience members sort of seeing that process as well, of sort of like the human tackling the everything that's going wrong with the code. let's get coding. So hopefully earlier you managed to download SuperCollider, and I'm going to try and go through some of the type of code that I would be running. So if you just go to wherever you put SuperCollider on your machine, and you can just double click on this thing that says supercollider.app, and you should then get something up that looks a bit like a window up that looks a bit like this. And this is our sort of SuperCollider coding window. So we should, if we get you also to open up the code document, so also wherever you put the code document on your machine, you can just drag and drop that onto your SuperCollider window, or you can go File, Open, and navigate to wherever you put it, and say Open, and that should open that up for you. So hopefully you're now seeing essentially this document, which has got a lot of red text in it that I'm going to talk about in a minute. Sorry, something slightly weird going on for me. Okay, it shouldn't be as slow for you. Okay, yeah, so you should see these three windows. So we've got our code window here. Here we have what's essentially like the documentation and help window, and down here is the post window. So there's going to be like loads of text kind of posted here once you're writing and executing code. Most of it you kind of don't really need to know what it means, but some of it might be useful to you. So in the code file that you've got, you probably won't have this block of code, and that's fine because you don't need it, but I do, because I'm running some network stuff so that you can know what's going on. So you can skip right down to this line, which should say hello world.postln. So this is going to be our first line of code that we're going to run. So to run that code, you want to put your cursor on that line and then just hit Shift and Enter. And what you should see then is down here, it'll post hello world and then hello world again. And essentially what's happening here is you have two things that are important. The hello world, which is essentially some information that we're sending to SuperCollider, and then .postln, which is telling SuperCollider what we're going to do with that bit of code. So in this case, we're saying take hello world and post it to the post window. So I could equally change this to something else, and run it again with my Shift and Enter, and I'm going to get something else down here. So I've essentially just changed the information, but kept the action the same. Another thing to know is that everything that comes after a double slash is called a comment. So that's essentially like text that's really useful for us to know, but that you want SuperCollider to ignore. So you might want to write some notes in your code, and that's cool, but you just need to do // here's my notes about how to Algorave in SuperCollider. Ooh. And then, yeah, that's how you can write anything you need to know in the code window. So the next thing we probably want to do is SuperCollider is essentially two programs. There's kind of like the language bit, which is this stuff here, and then there's also the server, which is the stuff that makes code. So to run the server, we need to run this line of code, which is s.boot. So again, you want to put your cursor there, and hit Shift and Enter. So again, S is the sort of how we talk about the server, and then .boot is what we want to do with the server. So we want to boot the server. So down here, you should again get like loads of text. And as soon as this bit of the window is turned green, you know that the server is then running. If you don't have green there for some reason, you might need to go up here and just go to the server menu and then reboot server, and hopefully that would work for you. Okay, so now that we've run our first line of code, now we maybe want to try and make some sound. So I'm just going to put my headphones on so I can hear what's going on. So this is the first line of code we're going to run for making sound. So we've got our two brackets here and then .play. So essentially we're telling SuperCollider, play something. So if we run that, we should get a nice piano-y sound. I do not get a nice piano-y sound, and so I'm just going to check in my audio settings because I've got some kind of complicated things going on here. So I know that I'm getting audio in SuperCollider. So the question is why I'm not getting audio in my headphones, which is probably something to do with the audio routing. So I'm going to 3, 4. Let's just try that again. That's exciting because it should be sending to should be sending now. Sorry about this. I did check all of this beforehand, but technology always has a way of going wrong when you need it to not go wrong. Okay, that should be going to you guys. Hopefully at this point you're hearing a nice piano-y kind of sound. But frustratingly, I'm not hearing a nice piano-y kind of sound. Which I'm gonna restart SuperCollider and see if I can get something working here. Okay. Should be going straight through. No, that's not a problem. That could well been it. So let's just try this again. I did a bit of a hard quit there, so I need to boot SuperContinent language again, which you shouldn't need to do. So let's run this, and then my s.boot. Okay. I think I'm back. Yeah, great. Sorry about that. For some reason, the connection dropped between my sound card and my computer, which is perplexing, but that's what happened. Hopefully you guys have managed to get as far as I got now. So I am now hearing a nice piano-y sound now when I run that code, so that's perfect. Essentially, what we might want to now do, I would say that you guys probably don't need to do this, but I do, is to quit the server and start it again. So in my case, I'm just running with a bit of a different setup because I'm sending my audio via loopback so that I can also send it to you as well as my sound card. So that's why I've got this kind of funny setup, and I'm also making some more channels for myself. And then when I boot the server, oh yeah, no, we do need to do quit. So let's just do s.quit. Sorry, I'm totally like lost myself because of that weird audio problem. So you can ignore this bit of code, but you do need to run this bit of code. So what we're going to do is just highlight that bit of code and then hit Shift and Enter. And that's going to run a bunch of code at the same time, which will get you fun things that you would like to have during an Algorave set. So it's going to give you level meters. So this will show you if any of your tracks are peaking. It's giving you a stethoscope, so this is going to show you your waveforms, and it's going to show you the server window. So this is giving you like a master volume slider, and it's also giving you a record button. So if you want to record your set, you can just like hit there and it'll generate an audio file for you on the computer, which is great. And it also has these CPU meters. So if you're like using tons and tons of computer power, your audio is likely to glitch. So it's kind of nice to be able to just see what your CPU is at there. So yeah, once you've run that, you've got all these windows. Now you need to run this line of code, which is super important, and that's p=proxy space.push. And you don't need to know exactly what that's doing, but it's essentially creating the environment for live coding. So if we don't run that, some of our code below is not going to behave how we want it to. So it's just kind of changing some settings within SuperContinent so that it's in live coding mode. And then we're gonna run this block as well. So again, you can either drag that and hit Shift Enter again, or you can just put your cursor somewhere between these two round brackets and hit Command and Enter, or if you're on Windows, it would be Control and Enter. And that's made a few more windows. The proxy mixer, so that's like a nice mixer window. So every sound you make is going to appear here, and it'll have like a volume slider and an off and on button, and the PDEF window, which gives you an off and on button for patterns that we might make later. And then p.fade time, so that's essentially setting a global crossfade. So that's saying like when you change a sound, it's going to crossfade to the new version within 2 seconds. Tempo clock, so that's our metronome essentially. And then we're setting our tempo to 135 over 60, so that's 135 BPM. So that's all taken like so much more time than I thought it would. So I'm going to try and like rush through a little bit of like the sound code, and then do maybe a shorter performance than planned for you. Essentially, when we write our live code in SuperCollider, we need to give everything a name. So the way that we do that is with this construct. So we have this tilde symbol, which I always forget where it is on the keyboard. Oh, it's next to the Z. It's Shift and then the button next to the Z on a Mac. And then a name. So in this case, we've called it Alice, but it could also be like Rudolph or any string of letters, really. The name is essentially just how SuperCollider knows how to refer to this, to whatever we're going to put between the curly brackets. So then we're saying equals, so then we're saying what does this refer to, and then we have our curly brackets. And everything that we put between the curly brackets is stuff that's going to make sound. If we scroll down a bit and we go to our first bit of sound making code, we're calling this one Alicia, and this is our first bit of sound code. So this is just a sine oscillator. So this is synosc and then .ar. And we just need the .ar basically to tell SuperCollider play it with a rate where we can actually hear it. So there's some other options here like IR and KR, which we might use for other purposes like controlling another oscillator. But anything that we want to hear, we need to put .ar after. So if I just run this, and then we've got some things that we can do with that. So we can say alicia.play. And we should see and hear here a nice sine tone. Alicia.stop, so that's stopping the sound. And .clear, so that would remove everything associated to Alicia from the server. So then if we used Alicia again, SuperCollider wouldn't know what that means because you've cleared it. And you can see once we've made that we've got this nice slider here with the play, stop button, and a nice volume slider there. So that's our sort of first type of sound wave we can make. Another one would be a saw wave. So now I've got a saw, which is more of a like triangle-y kind of wave. This is a pink noise. Again, it's goes on our mixer now. Pulse wave. This is a square waveform essentially. And yeah, and so those are sort of some basic types of waveforms that that I would use in a set. You might have noticed that essentially when we're running those, SuperCollider knows what frequency to play it at and how loud to play it, and that's because SuperCollider has like some basic settings stored in the server where if you don't tell it a piece of information, it assumes some information. So like before, when we run our brackets.play, we haven't told SuperCollider what to play here, but because we haven't told it what to play, it looks in its like server information and it's like, what do I play if it doesn't tell me what to play? And what it plays is a nice piano-y sound. And it's the same with these waveforms, because we haven't given it any parameters. It's just saying, well, what's the default pitch for saw wave, and it happens to be 440, and so that's what it plays, and about one volume. We probably want to add our own arguments most of the time, and how we do this is with the round brackets, and we essentially use these round brackets and then we list the parameters. So frequency is the pitch, phase you don't really need to know about, but you kind of need to put the 0 in there, and then mul is like how loud. It's short for multiplication, so it's kind of the computery way for like saying how loud should this be. So if we run this now, I get a nice high-pitched sine wave, and I can just now go ahead and start changing those parameters, and you can hear I get the sort of 2-second crossfade. I can make it louder, quieter. So the maximum number you would want to put in the mul is 1. Everything else is going to be quieter than that. And then maybe I'm just going to stop that again. So here we've kind of told SuperCollider, oh, I'm going to give you a frequency now, and this is going to be the number. But we don't really need to do that. It's like maybe good for you to know what you're doing, but otherwise we would just use the shorter version usually. So in this case, this code is exactly the same as this code, just I haven't written out what this parameter is. So I can play this now, yeah, and do exactly the same. So change the parameters, get something different. And essentially every type of wave is going to have a different set of parameters. So the sine oscillator has the frequency and the phase and the multiplication. Saw doesn't have a phase, it just has frequency and multiplication. And pink noise only has the mul or the amplitude. And we can find out what parameters we need for a waveform by double clicking, highlighting the blue text essentially, and hitting Command, or if you're on Windows, Control and D. And then we wait a few seconds, and in this help window here, it's going to bring up the documentation for that waveform. There we go. So here we've got our saw wave, and sort of really near the top of the file we have saw, and we've got frequency, mul, add, you don't need to use that right now. And then it just tells you what it means. So freq is the frequency in hertz, which is another way of specifying pitch. The mul, which is the output, will be multiplied by this value. It's essentially the amplitude. And if we do the same for pink noise, yeah, here we just have the sort of volume arguments. So if I play pink noise, I can also make it louder or quieter. That's all I can do. So yeah, I mean, you can play around with these and sort of look at the help files and play around with different numbers and see what happens. Okay. So we've already talked about the proxy mixer, and also that if you create a new sound, it'll just appear in the window. They sort of come up in alphabetical order, so using names in alphabetical order, and then it'll always go to the bottom. Another sort of important thing to know about SuperCollider is that like duplication and multi-channel is like super easy, but there's like a sort of slight quirk to it that's sort of important to know. So essentially, if instead of having one saw wave with one frequency, we want to have lots of saw waves with different frequencies, all we need to do is list our frequencies between square brackets. So essentially all of this is my frequency parameter, but I'm just making 4 saw waves now with 700, 800, 900, and 600 hertz. So if I just run that, and then I can turn up the volume, and you can see, or maybe hear now, that I've given it 4 frequencies, but you probably only hear 2. So what it does now is essentially make each saw wave on a new channel. So you won't hear in stereo, but in 4 channels, and unless you've got like a really fancy studio set up, you can probably only hear the first 2 of them. So there's some things that we can do to get around this little quirk of SuperCollider, and that is use one of 2 functions. So the first one is mix, and what we want to do is put our multi-channel oscillator within mix.new. So this is essentially the first parameter of mix, and this is going to make 3 sine oscillators, but put them all on the first channel. So now you hear that we hear the 3 channels, and they're all on our left output channel. And another option is splay, which it works in a similar way, but what it does is spread the channels out across the stereo field. So your first parameter is going to be hard left, and your last one is going to be hard right, and the other ones are going to be sort of equally spaced in between. So if we run that, we should hear lots of sine oscillators now, and I can kind of subtract and add new things, and it's always going to splay however many there are across the stereo field. So I could have like hundreds of numbers here, and it's just always going to be a stereo sound with however many files, with however many waveforms there are. And there's various kind of fancy ways that you can do this as well. So instead of doing this, we could have array.fill. We could tell it we want 100 waveforms, and we want them all to be between 0 and 1000 hertz. And then I'm going to get some sort of noisier, more complicated things. And that's kind of something that I do sometimes when I'm like, I just want to like fill up some frequency spectrum, or I want sort of a denser sound. Sometimes I just sort of use these array.fills to make something a bit more complex or dense. I'm just like slightly aware of the time, so I'm going to try and rush through some other things, and then I think I'm just going to play a set for you, and hopefully that makes some of these things a bit clearer anyway. So as with other softwares, you can imagine we also have things like filters in SuperCollider. So this is like RLPF is like a low pass filter, and for this I just put my oscillator into the first argument, and then my filter parameters. So it's filtering at 800 hertz, 0.2. But I can also do things like this, where essentially instead of saying I'm going to write everything out here, I'm just going to say take my sound that I wrote earlier, which is called Betty, and use that as the input to the filter. So we always need our dot, essentially the name, and then .ar. And this is sort of like a quick way that you can start like chaining up effects. So I might then take filter Betty and put it inside another like a reverb or something. So I might do something like filter Betty 2, and start chaining up my effects like that, essentially. So those would be kind of terrifying parameters in a reverb, which would crash your computer. And so then you sort of can get some more like complicated effect chains. So you're not just making a saw wave, but a saw wave which has got a high pass filter and then a reverb on it. And then I think I won't talk about modulation because it's kind of a big and complex topic and we don't really have time, but maybe you can look through that afterwards. But that's kind of the way that I use to make some more complicated sounds when I'm doing synthesis. And again, with this, I can sort of plug my other sounds that I've made in there if I want. And these are some more kind of effecty things. So a reverb, a comb filter, decimator, which is like a bit crusher. And then essentially with these kind of tools, we can start building up some more like complicated sounds. So I've got here like essentially a few effects chains. So I've got this sort of like complex modulated sound going into a comb filter and then going into a reverb. So this is the first sound, which has like tons of modulation on it. And then this is it going into the comb filter. And then this is with my reverb. And so when I'm performing, I'm usually kind of like making these kind of slightly more complicated synthesis chains and then passing them through various effects. And then more or less like just layering things up. So yeah, I would start maybe then using the mixer once we've got a few things going. And trying to make something a bit more complicated. And another thing that you might want to look at in the file, and I really don't have time to talk about it, which is a shame, but it's also possible to make patterns with SuperCollider, but it takes a bit more code. So we need this thing called a synth-def, which I'm just going to run this and sort of try to show you basically what this is doing. And then I also need a pattern. So a pattern is essentially a thing that says like trigger a sound and do it with these parameters. So this is essentially a bit of code that's gonna trigger a synthesis thing with various parameters over time. So you hear I have a bit of a melody here, and I can just change that slightly. Something weird just happened there. So yeah, I'm just changing my degree here, which is sort of analogous to frequency, but it's more about using scale patterns. And then I have another parameter which is called octave. So that's like a really fun part of SuperCollider to look into if you want to start making more beat-based stuff. So I'm just going to stop that and then switch to my performance setup. And maybe while I do this, which might take a few minutes, you want to just keep playing with the code file that I've given you and play around with changing some parameters and seeing what happens there. So I'm now going to quit this. And open a different part of a different window. So you might notice now that I've changed to a different type of window. Usually when I'm performing, I'm actually not using I'm not using the Super Collider text window because I need some different functionality. So I'm using Atom. So anyone who's sort of familiar with Atom, you can essentially install the Super Collider package for Atom, which will let you use Super Collider within it. And if you're not familiar with Atom, probably it's better to stay with the Super Collider, the standard Super Collider for now. So I'm just booting up some of my settings now. They're pretty similar to what I showed you in the workshopy part, but I'm just using, instead of the Super Collider standard clock, I'm using this clock called Mandelhub. And I more or less started using that because it lets you collaborate with other people really easily with like a shared tempo, but it's not actually like the most stable clock ever. So tempo clock might be better if you're not collaborating, but I'm kind of used to this now, so I'm still using it. So let's just check if I'm getting sound here. Yes, I am, so that's great. And I'm also another thing that I didn't really have time to show you in this workshop is that you can also run you don't have to do synthesis in Super Collider, you can also just load samples in. Yeah, there's just some sort of slightly complicated code for doing that, which I didn't really want to get into today. And this code here, which I may use later in the set, is essentially like an automatic rhythm generator that I wrote, which essentially triggers patterns, triggers drum samples with various auto generation type stuff. So I think I'm just going to get started with the performance, and I'm going to try and play for about 20 minutes. Sometimes what I do at the start of my sets is just like play the code that I wrote when I was sound checking to start. Just so I have something, but yeah, other times I don't do that as well, but I'm going to do that today. thanks for joining the workshop. And that's it. And if you want to get in touch with me about anything in the workshop, then feel free to. I'm just looking for the slide where I have. Yeah, feel free to either message me on Twitter or send me an email. If I could just get the slide up. Yeah, so yeah, that's my email address, and I'm at Shelly.Knotts on Twitter. So if you want to ask me anything about live coding in SuperContinent, get in touch or join one of the TopLab forums, and there's always people there willing to help with any problems. Yeah, so that's it. Have a nice weekend and enjoy the rest of the